Good evening and welcome to the second in our webinar series. This evening I will be hosting Tim Gill and Denise Sheridan, who will be joining us to talk about risk and risk in the outdoor environment. Tim is a global advocate for children's outdoor play and mobility, and the author of Urban Playground and No Fear, which is in keeping with what he will be discussing this evening. His book, The No Fear, is available as a PDF on his website, Rethinking Childhood. And I will just hand you over to Tim now and he will chat to you. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marguerite. Now I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to rely on the technology to work for me, and I'm assuming that Margarita will shout if it's all gone wrong. But as she said, I'm going to be talking about a balanced approach to risk and outdoor learning and play. And the truth is that we have become very anxious about what is such a natural mode of being for children, and some of that anxiety is captured on this cartoon that you can see. But I'm going to start by just doing a little bit of interactivity and asking you to think about the kind of places that you used to play, and to focus and picture in your mind one place that you would say was your favorite place to play as a child. And I'm going to just ask you to briefly just type that into the chat. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that and then a few seconds to type into the chat. Now, I must confess, I can't see the chat, but we'll deal with that later on down the line. I still very much encourage you to do some sharing, describe in a few words your favorite place to play as a child. And then I'm going to do a tiny bit of mind reading. So you'll be in a position to see whether or not I actually have been able to read your minds. And I'm going to take a guess that the kind of things that are coming up in the chat, in other words, the places that are resonant from your own childhood, are places like the woods, fields, maybe scraps of land near where you lived, rivers, the beach, if you were lucky enough to live near the beach. Perhaps maybe you said the street, but anyhow, what I'm reckoning on is that the emerging picture is that the places that are most resonant to us from our own childhoods are places that have two important qualities. First of all, they're out of doors, and second, they're out of sight of adults, or at least not under the close supervision of adults. As I say, well, maybe at the end I can go into the chat and have a look and see how right I am or wrong. But I must confess I've done this exercise before. I do it a lot when I talk. And that is the pattern that comes back. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because the truth is that we human beings have an appetite for exploration. We want to kind of explore the world under our own steam, figure out how things work, what we can do, understand our place in the world. And my next slide, I think, captures a way in which children's relationship to the neighbours and places around them has been changing in the last decade or 3 or 4. So what you can see, I hope, is a map, and that map shows you what you might call the roaming range or the home territory of 4 children. Now, all of these children are 8 years old, but they happen to be 4 children who were in 4 generations of the same family, and they all grew up in the same city. So that big blob that you can see, maybe you can see my cursor there, that's taking up most of the map. That's the roaming range of the great-grandfather in this family at the age of 8. He could go 10 kilometers across the city. You can see the 2 smaller circles with firstly the grandfather, then the mother in this family at the age of 8. And here the son, the yellow dot in the top left. He's actually allowed to walk a couple of 100 meters to the end of his street. In fact, that's more right to roam, if you like, more everyday freedom than most 8-year-olds are allowed these days. We're really, you'd say that they're, it's not an exaggeration to say that children aged 8 are rarely allowed much beyond the shadows cast by their own homes. And so this map, it's no exaggeration to say that what gets me out of bed in the mornings and doing what I do really all springs from and is a response to the change in childhood that's illustrated by this map, which I think is one of the most profound and underexplored changes in the nature of childhood. And by the way, this is a map from an English city, as you can see. Not so long ago, I think it was in the Irish Times, a very similar map was produced for generations of people growing up in Dublin. And I have examples from other European cities as well. So this pattern of what you call the shrinking, might call the shrinking horizons of childhood is happening for children of all social classes, boys and girls. It's really a pattern that's emerging around the world. Now, why is this happening? It's complicated, and actually I haven't really got time to go into in detail here, but I think that a better question, or at least a question that's as important, is what are children missing out from? Why, or in other words, why might the sorts of experiences that children get when they're exploring and playing and getting around their names, why might they matter? And I think one of the reasons is that, as I said, children have an appetite for experience and adventure. So you could say that childhood is amongst other things a kind of journey, and that at the heart of this journey of childhood is children gradually taking on more responsibility for themselves. And when children are born, they're entirely dependent upon adults for their most basic needs. But as they grow up, they gradually become more independent. And so at the heart of this journey of childhood is the gradual transfer of risk management responsibility from adults to children. And that's what these images are trying to capture here. By the way, that's Sky Brown, the breathtakingly talented British skateboarder at the last Olympics in that last image. So it's because of the centrality of notions of responsibility and independence and self-confidence and what the psychologists call self-efficacy, this sense that I am somebody who can kind of figure stuff out and find my way in the world. It's because of that I think this topic of risk and is so important, and why a balanced approach to risk is needed. So I'm going to spend the rest of the talk, about another 20 or so minutes, looking with a few more insights into risk and what got me interested in the subject, what a balanced approach looks like, a few remarks about parental attitudes to risk, a little bit around regulation and law, and then just wrapping up with some ideas and resources and a concluding message. So that's the kind of pattern of the talk. I'm going to now invite a little bit more interaction, maybe on the chat if you like. You can see some familiar objects in front of you there. I'm sorry, I'm just going to shut my phone up because it's making the odd noise. I'm going to invite you to comment in the chat if you have ever worked in a setting where the use of these objects has been prohibited. Okay, egg boxes and toilet roll holders. Again, I'm going to allow just a few seconds for people to throw a few comments up in the chat. And I can share with you, this is an anecdotal observation, but when I give talks in person, remember what they were like? In-person talks with groups of practitioners from early years and childcare. And I asked them that question. I asked for a show of hands, how many people have worked in settings where these items are banned? Somewhere between a quarter and a half of the people in my audience will put their hands up. Okay, so I have news for you. The idea that there is a prohibition on the use of egg boxes and toilet roll holders is a myth. Here in the UK, it was actually featured as Myth of the Month for August 2007 under the website of the Health and Safety Executive. Now, the HSE, I'll say a bit more about them later. They're the government agency with responsibility for workplace health and safety. They are the people with the big stick. And as they shared in this website post, no credible agency has ever said you can't use egg boxes or prohibited the use of egg boxes and toilet roll holders. So the fact that it's still a widespread notion is a sort of illustration of how free-floating our anxiety is about harm to children, but also harm by children. And I argue in my work and in my book, No Fear, that anxiety is actually taking us 180 degrees away from the kind of childhood experiences that actually help children learn how to look after themselves. Obviously, this is a bit of a UK context, but in Ireland, I know there are similar anxieties, and this was a story from a few years ago. It was in the Sunday Times, but it was about schools in Ireland banning running in the playground. And my interest in this topic partly came about because 15 or 20 years ago, I used to run a charity, an NGO. It was then called the Children's Play Council. It's now called Play England, and it sort of flew the flag for the importance of play. And we realized that the kind of places that we were creating for children were becoming ever more dismal. And here's a particularly sorry example. And so, we were seeing this proliferation of places where a sterile, unchallenging ambience, springy rubber and dog-proof fencing were fitted as standard, and where no self-respecting 4-year-old would really stick around for more than a few minutes. And I, amongst others, a group of us just started challenging this relentless trend towards what I call in my book the sort of zero risk mindset. And when I dug a bit deeper to try and find out where this idea came from, and why was it that playgrounds were getting more and more sort of safety-fied to the exclusion of any fun or engagement from children, I did some historical research and started looking into playground safety. And I, in fact, reminded myself of something I can vaguely remember from my own youth, which is back in the late 80s, there was a big focus on playground safety, and there were some problems with playgrounds that were badly managed or badly built. But part of this campaigning around playground safety was driven by the BBC television programme That's Life. Now, I'm guessing many of you won't be familiar with that programme. It was incredibly influential and popular kind of consumer campaigning programme. And I was lent a video, in fact, a VHS video of one episode of the programme around playground safety. And in this episode, and you can see a still from it here, you can see the presenters making the case for spongy rubber in playgrounds. And they're doing so through a kind of experiment where you're taking a china plate and you're dropping the china plate on the studio floor, and then you're dropping it on a square of rubber. Now, the result of the experiment, of course, is entirely predictable. But what I want to draw your attention to, and the kind of light bulb moment for me watching this, was what's the message here? What's the story? The clear message here is that children are as vulnerable as china plates. They are irredeemably stupid, and they're completely incapable of learning how to keep themselves safe, and that the role of the adult is to eliminate all possible risk. And so this image encapsulates what I call a sort of philosophy of protection, that the adult job with children is to protect them from all harm. Let's fast forward a few years, and I was lucky enough, and this was having been at the Children's Play Council for a bit, to hear a talk by a Danish landscape architect who'd come over to the UK in 1999. And her name is Helene Ebeling. and I'm lucky enough to consider her a friend. But as far as I'm concerned, she's an artist and a genius. She creates the most wonderful playgrounds in Copenhagen and in other parts of the world. And she came and spoke at a play conference and said that she thought standardized playgrounds were dangerous, but just in another way. She said that when the distance between all the rungs in a climbing net or a ladder is exactly the same, the child has no need to concentrate on where he puts his feet. And that lesson, she said, cannot be carried over to the knobbly and asymmetrical forms with which one is confronted throughout life. And I love that phrase, knobbly and asymmetrical forms. And so this sort of set the scene for a different approach. And so you remember that dismal playground that I showed you earlier from the 90s? Well, I'm now going to show you another unsupervised public playground from my home city of London. This one was actually built in 2012. It's part of the Olympic Park in London. You can see it looks rather different to the one that I showed you earlier. And in fact, I'm rather proud of this playground because I helped to set the brief for it. So how can this be? How can it be that playgrounds are becoming more adventurous and challenging? They really are. This is not by no means unique. The answer is that those of us who are involved in playgrounds, as I said, realized we were going in a really unhealthy direction and that we had to do something about it, and particularly do something with the way that we understood risk in play. And we made the place for a new approach, risk-benefit assessment. And in essence, it works like this. In a conventional risk assessment, that's what you can see up here. It's boil everything down, and it's basically you figure out what can hurt people, and you try and control them. So it's a risk reduction approach. But what we argued for was that with playgrounds, you need a balanced approach. You need to weigh up, on the one hand, the risks, and on the other hand, the benefits, the good things that can happen. Crucially, of course, the good things that arise because of the presence of risk and challenge. And I'm pleased to say that this approach has become widely adopted. But actually, it's not that hard to grasp. In fact, here's a quote from the former chief medical officer here in England, who talks. She has a background in mental health, and this is a report about children's mental health. And she talks about how by exposing children to low doses of challenges, we strengthen their ability to act later in life. You remember that journey of childhood that I talked about. Or take the Health and Safety Executive. I introduced them earlier. They have produced their own statement on children's play, talking about how in play and in managing risks in play, risks and benefits are considered alongside each other in a risk-benefit assessment. This is a report from the Scottish Care Inspectorate. So this, again, is the regulatory body licensing childcare in early years in Scotland. Talks about moving away from a deficit model, the philosophy of protection, and instead to a more holistic risk-benefit model. So this is the approach that we set out in some guidance that was commissioned by the government and that I helped to write about 13 years ago now. And really, it's a fairly straightforward process. You start with, and it's a generic process. So you can apply it to a piece of equipment, to an activity, to a space, to a program. You start by thinking about the benefits. What are the good things that you want to happen? Crucially, of course, the good things in terms of children's learning and growth. What are the risks? What are the things that might go wrong? But before you leap to a decision, what about local factors that you might want to take into account? What might you know about your children or about your setting and your space? Are there any precedents and comparisons? Are there any things that other people have done that will help you in your decision? Crucially, if you're wanting to be a bit braver and to try something new, are there other settings or maybe other parts of the world where new approaches have been tried out? And then you make a decision. Of course, you document it if it needs to go down in writing, and then you carry out your actions. So it's a very simple, what we call a narrative process. There's no kind of matrices or scoring or anything like that. You say what you're going to do, and then you do what you say. So I want to give an illustration of a balanced approach to risk from a setting that I was lucky enough to visit. And this is from Bladen Kindergarten in Toronto in Canada. A very, on the face of it, kind of ordinary, you can see pretty suburban, in fact, fairly urban, mixed neighborhood. But the principal and the staff there had a strong commitment to outdoor play. And when I went to visit, one of the really interesting approaches that the staff team shared with me was what they called the 17-second rule. Okay, so how does the 17-second rule work? It works like this. If you, as a member of staff, if you see a child who's maybe struggling, who's perhaps fallen over, or who's got into a dispute, or facing a challenging situation, you don't step in at the first sign of discomfort. You wait for 17 seconds and then you step in. Now, just a couple of things. Firstly, the 17 seconds, actually it's quite a long time, but you can see it's an arbitrary amount. The second thing is to say, of course, this is a rule of thumb. It's not a regulation. If there's an obvious and present danger, then you don't follow the 17-second rule. But what was really interesting to me was that the staff described how 99 times out of 100, whatever it was that the children were facing, that challenge or adverse circumstance, the children themselves figured out what to do about it. They got themselves up, dusted themselves off and carried on, or worked out how to solve their dispute. And so, of course, the implication here is that if the adults had stepped in, they would have stopped that learning and that sense of competence and confidence and of self-efficacy from unfolding. So I think that's a really nice illustration of a balanced approach. And by the way, the principal at this setting had a really interesting take on what she said to parents, especially kind of anxious parents, about this setting's approach to outdoor play. And she said, look, here in our setting, we're in the business of helping our children learn to be responsible. Right? That's one of the things that we think is really important. Now, we think that should start now. When do you think it should start? Do you think it should start in the 2nd grade, in the 5th grade, in the 12th grade when they're going to their first party, when they're walking up the aisle? When do you want your children to start learning what it means to be responsible? And again, you really see back to that journey of childhood that I talked about earlier. So that's a cue for me to say a little bit more about parents, because I know from all my contact with settings and practitioners that this is a big challenge, thinking about the role of parents and the view of parents and the attitudes of parents. Well, actually, I think parents are on a kind of spectrum when it comes to child safety. Not all parents are in the same place. There are some parents who are pretty anxious. In fact, they're probably the sorts of parents who would be in the market for this product. I hope you can see that on your screen. These are toddler knee pads sold to mitigate the risk of injury from crawling around on hardwood flooring. So if you like, that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you have parents who take a pretty, shall we say, laissez-faire approach to their children's safety. I don't know if you can read the heading there. This is a newspaper story. Mother went on holiday and left children home alone for 3 weeks. Now, these are two extremes, but I think most parents are actually somewhere in the middle. They do want their children to be confident, to have some freedom, to learn the consequences of their actions. And this, by the way, is one couple who about 10 years ago came to the attention of the media because they let their children cycle to school. And the school in question threatened to report them to social services for doing so. And there was a big hullabaloo and the media got involved. But what was interesting here was this is the Shonrocks, the couple, that they had a really clear picture of what it meant to be a good parent. And for them, being a good parent meant allowing their children to have gradually more freedom. And I think there's a significant number, maybe even a silent majority of parents who take that view. So really the problem of parents, if there is a problem, is about that anxious and vocal minority, the parents who are at the anxious end of the spectrum, and how you deal with them. Got one more anecdote which speaks to that question. And this is actually from an Australian setting. It was from a out of school childcare setting, and they had a thing called Wheels Day. And how Wheels Day worked is that once a term, the kids who went there were allowed to bring in their scooters and skateboards and rollerblades and such, and have fun on their wheeled toys. And that was Wheels Day. And on one Wheels Day, sadly, one child had an accident and ended up with a broken limb. And so the parent of that child said, well, I mean, of course, you're going to stop Wheels Day, aren't you? It's very clearly too dangerous. But this is the interesting thing and the point of the story. The manager of this setting didn't think that was right. She just thought, no, that's too quick. So she actually did a very smart thing. She carried out a little poll, a survey of all of her parents, and said to them, we've just had this accident in Wheels Day. The question has been raised whether we should carry on. What do you think? And you may or may not be surprised to hear that apart from one family, everybody else said they wanted Wheels Day to continue, in the full knowledge that this accident had happened. And I think that was an interesting and quite productive way to open out the conversation about risk and parental attitudes. I've been speaking for about 25 minutes. I haven't really talked about the law very much. So what does the law say? Well, I'm not a lawyer. If you were here in person, I'd be asking you to sign a waiver at this point. But actually, the law is pretty simple on this topic, on occupational safety, on workplace safety, public risk. Our duty of care, your duty of care, is to take reasonable steps. And so that's a really important thing to hold on to, because anyone who's asking you to go on to go on beyond what is reasonable, they are being unreasonable. Okay, there's to ask and expect absolute safety is unreasonable. But it's important to realize that a reasonable approach is something that we need a shared view on, and that view and that understanding has to go up and down, if you like, the chain of command. And that's why places like the Care Inspectorate, who I mentioned earlier, are really helpful. So this is another quote from that report from the Scottish Care Inspectorate. And here the Care Inspectorate's been really very honest. And it said, in effect, when it first started to deal with outdoor nurseries without any indoor premises, they struggled. But then they had a debate. It was pretty heated at times. And in the course of that, they learned and started to think differently about risk and indeed about the regulation and licensing of outdoors only provision. And I really admire the Care Inspectorate for doing that. So really briefly, as I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I went and did a bit of research on Irish law. You can see down the bottom here, Health and Safety at Work Act to manage safety so far as is reasonably practicable. It's exactly the same phrase as in the UK health and safety law. I looked at your National Quality Framework for shelter, talking about the importance of having a variety of challenging and stimulating environments. And here's a component talking about the opportunities for challenge and what is called safe risk. Not massively keen on that phrase, safe risk, but I think we know what they're getting at. So, the people at the top are actually saying the right things. So the challenge is to get that fed through and a consistent approach. So I'm going to close by just sharing a few thoughts about what you could do at the practical level that puts into place a more balanced and adventurous offer for your children. I'm sure many of you are doing this already, but things like thinking about using loose parts, tools, timbers, ropes, tarpaulins, thinking about bringing everyday nature into your settings or taking your children out into nature, mud kitchens, trips, excursions. And I'm ending with forest and beach school. I'm a big fan of forest school. I make no apology for thinking they're a fantastic model. If you want to look a little bit more and you're interested in some of my work on the neighborhoods that children grow up in, feel free to check out my latest book, where I make the case for child-friendly streets, promoting walking and cycling, more adventurous public space and better housing. And so I've put in this slide deck a couple of links of some of the material that I mentioned earlier and some other relevant material, including some videos. So the recap. Risk-benefit assessment is your antidote to the zero-risk mindset, properly used. Be reasonable and assertive in grappling with these issues. I'm not saying you can ignore the law, but you can take a realistic and assertive approach to the question of the law as well. Find out and learn from others who are perhaps taken things a bit further than you're ready to, and from whose experience you can learn. Build understanding and support across your setting, including with parents, with managers, with regulators, with local partners. Really make the case for an adventurous spirit in what you do. And that brings me to my final sales pitch, if you like, which is this message. It's the kind of thing that crops up perhaps in your social media every now and again. It's not only, of course, a message about children and how children learn. It's also, I think, a principle that each of us can take back into our own settings and work, that, you know, we don't do great things if we're always staying inside our comfort zones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. That was very interesting. I particularly like that reference there to the 17-second rule. I have to say, I often think when parents are watching their young children starting to engage with these new adventures, that they immediately too anxious to jump in and sort of save them before they give them a chance to engage at all with what they're trying to do. We've had some very interesting answers to your poll, to your question, so we might just put a few of them up there for you.
Yeah, I'm just looking through them. So I'm seeing, well, yes, climbing up a big oak tree, in the stream at the bottom of our garden, woods climbing trees. Tree climbing is a wonderful activity. I could write a book about it. Seaside, yes, I'm not, I think we get the picture. I see some interesting discussion about the toilet roll holders. I see somebody saying it's prohibited by the health board. I think that's worth investigating. I'm not in a position to say, but it's Anne Flanagan, and I would be interested to hear if your health board really does think that, and if so, the basis on which they say that, because I think that's the sort of thing where, as with the example of the care inspectorate that I gave, where you might want to invite them to have a further conversation about that.
Very good. Thank you very much, Tim. And now I'll just introduce you to Denise, our second speaker for this evening. Denise Sheridan, she is actually a student on our master's programme at the moment, and she's very interested in the outdoor environment as well. She has a lovely little preschool that is outdoor all of the time. And you might have noticed, I don't know whether people noticed, but if you didn't, you can go and have a little look. She wrote a lovely post for us, and it's up on our Portobello blog. And it takes you through a day in the experience of being in an outdoor setting, a fully outdoor setting. So I'll just hand you over to Denise, and she'll take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. So I'm just going to share my presentation here now with you. Okay. So as Margarita's introduced us, we are a team in East Clare, and preschool is called Wheelbarrow, so I'm very fortunate to work with my sister as well. So we've very shared experience of growing up in the countryside here in East Clare. And what I'm going to talk about today is looking at STEAM in the natural outdoor environment. Okay. Now, and as Marguerite had mentioned, I'm a master's student as well. So I'm very interested in the outdoor environment. And one of the quotes I really like to go back and relook at is from Pellegrini in 2009. So looking at outdoor play and exploring in playgrounds, parks and gardens are ideal settings for scientific and artistic play for children. So I'm going to show us some examples of those as we go through. And our setting is an inclusive nature school. So we follow a play-based learning curriculum, which I know a lot of preschools and early years services do in Ireland. And we're based around the Astra framework. So we very much approach a child-centered approach, and we promote creative learning environment, giving equal opportunities for all children. So we place high value on sustainability, kindness, and nutritional learning. And we have our own school garden, and we have pots growing every type of plant and flower and all over our garden in the front and the back of our school. And Astra is an emerging curriculum. So we are really very lucky that our children are very engaged in the environment. And as a result of that, it's very easy for us to understand what their long-term, short-term, and day-to-day interests are. And we can incorporate that into our natural environment with them. So children's likes and interests are documented, and we actually get the children to do that themselves. So they can draw pictures for us, they can tell us a story, we can write down what they're really interested in. And because we have an outdoor environment, it's very easy to change that environment as well with the children. So I'll show you some examples of that as we move through here as well. So just looking at Wheelbarrow, so we look to promote play wherever we are with the children, and we have a number of different settings. So we have a forest-based mud kitchen area. We have a place where the kids can build dens. We do a lot of exploring with the kids. So some of the things that we do with them is really investigate the trees and the plants and the grassy areas around with them. And for that, it's very easy to get little things like we have compasses that we use with the children. We have little looking glasses so they can look really deep into leaves and flowers. And the more we do that with the children, the more we can see that their actual levels of play and exploration are much deeper than they would indoors as well. Okay, and then risk-taking. Tim talked a lot about risk-taking, and I think in an outdoor setting or in a preschool where you have both indoor and outdoor, you're all the time balancing as an educator the care of the child and making sure that you are giving them enough space so they can learn and become little independent human beings as well. And as much as possible, we've done that in our setting. And I suppose one of the real experiences, because we were in operation now for over 11 years, one of our experiences are just to scaffold the child. And most early educators are very experienced at scaffolding. So what we do is, we have log walks, we have tree stumps, but what we do is we put it out, we're working with kids from 2 to 5. So it's at their level. And if they want us to walk with them, we will walk with them. If they want us to hold their hand, we'll hold their hand. So they know that we're there if they need us, but we also give them the space to actually explore it themselves. And you can see here, one of the picture there to the left shows the kids all climbing at different levels and different spaces, and they're not in on top of each other. You know, they're giving everybody their own space, but at the same time, they're all climbing at different levels as well. And so for us, what we're trying to do is encourage risk-taking in the outdoors, but also letting the children know, look, we're there. If you need us, we're there. We can help you. And you will find that there will be some children who really want to do the log walks or really want to climb, but they want, just for that initial few times, that security that you're there near them as well. So that's what we do with them on the outdoor side. And what I want to do as well is just talk and maybe give some examples of how we incorporate STEAM into everyday practice within our setting. So the first box I'm going to talk around is here in science. And when you work in nature, when you go for a walk in nature, life cycles are all around us all of the time. So we can see the seasonal changes. The outside nature is just an art palette of colors and textures and different feels and sounds. Every day when we're outside, there's something new. So some of the things that we have done with the kids here are looking at, how do we incorporate science into what we do with them? So as I mentioned already, we do an awful lot of gardening with the kids, planting, and you can see here we've started to look at, well, how can we bring science a bit into that as well? But at their level. So we're also green school, so we focus a lot on recycling and using whatever products we have within the school, using them back, putting them back into the garden. So some of these are little projects that people can do within their preschools or at home with their kids as well. These are just little window boxes. You can see these are all pencil sharpenings, which we take and we take them from the preschool and we put them in the plants with the children, and then they act as a warm blanket or a bedding for the plants as they grow up. And then you can see the same over here with the tea bags. And it's just really understanding then with the kids that, we're keeping the soil warm. It helps the plants to grow. We can see some little shoots coming through. And it's just really giving them the knowledge so they understand as well how the whole life cycle of nature is working around them. Another little experiment that we do with the kids as well is if we gather water in everything, it could be in jars, it could be in buckets, and we use it for maths and science. So we can measure with this little photo. What I have done, or what we've done here with them, is put different colors into, so little drops of food coloring into the jars. And if you add flowers with white petals into these, they will actually absorb the color of the water up into the flowers. So that's something you can do at home. You can do it in your preschool, and you can do it with the after school kids as well. And it's just something that gives them a vivid and very quick reaction. And it is science, and it is changing, it's transforming. And so the kids actually love anything like that, where they can visually see what the difference is. Okay, so moving on to technology. And technology for kids within our setting, we look at how can we support the kids to problem solve, looking at seeds. Nature is full of failure and success. So some seeds will grow, some seeds won't grow. And it's all about getting the balance right and working with the kids on that. So I've just a few examples of what we do in the garden and how that links into technology as well. So everything we do within the garden is like a little community. We sow together, we send home seeds that the kids have planted here with us. So they can watch an extension of the learning that we do here with the kids, but also that they can care for their own plants at home as well and just continue the learning. And working then, if we're talking about potatoes that we dig from the garden, we've sown in the garden, we dig them from the garden, and then you go into the whole conversation with the kids of, well, when I go into the supermarket, where are those potatoes coming from? And as a green school, we're on our 6th green flag with Antashka this year, and what we'll be looking at is global litter and waste management. So how do we really source more locally? How do we look at the garden and see what we can grow more in the garden? And how can we really look at supporting local more than going externally all the time, and the impact of buying in bananas, buying in apples from Spain when we can have an orchard or an apple tree in our garden. So all that type of community building as well with the children. It focuses them on sustainability, but also gives them responsibility for plants or crops that we're growing with them here as well. Okay, then on to engineering. So engineering is a big word, but really everything the kids do, whether it's inside or outside within an early years setting, is building. Kids love to build. Their schemas are all around building, repeating, fixing. They just love it. And we love the loose parts part. So this is interesting in that these are little runners and tunnels that you can put stones through, or you can put cars through. But one of the boys, sorry, I'm after going up there now, and we'll just go back up one. Let me see. There we go, sorry. Okay, and then what one of the boys was trying to do was to extend where the cars were coming down. So you can see that in the second picture here. and he just couldn't get it. So someone came over with a wheelbarrow, and basically all of a sudden he could sort it, and he could balance, and he could connect his pipes. And then it started to get really interesting. So by the time all of this had actually finished, we had 3 or 4 different wheelbarrows all lined up together. The kids had figured it out themselves. You can see there was a lot more children getting involved, and there was no talk between the kids of how they were going to do this. It just happened. They came over and they tried. And there was little cars of some still building while some were trying out were the cars actually working or not and coming down. And you'll see here, some of these are very structured or polished wood. So what this was, we have a lot of outdoor kitchens. We have this table here is like a shop front. And I had ordered a box of basically just so we can store some stuff outside. And these are all these planks. So they're very polished and very finished. But the kids were there when it arrived. So, and it came in it was all single pieces of wood on the pallet. So when we took it apart, immediately they started playing with it. So we just haven't built the box. We are just using it in their everyday play. And it just shows you, that it doesn't need to be anything really fancy. Put a pallet in front of kids and they'll make it into a table. It could be a dance stand for them. There's so much they can do with just simple pieces of wood outside. Okay, moving on to the arts. So what we do, as I said, we do a lot of green, I suppose, looking at our environment, how we can promote sustainability through our environment and everything we do. And this is just where we had a little project we were doing with the kids, where we took loads of recycled material. So these, you can see here, with this, they come up with a solution of how do we stop polluting our seas? And these are all 3 to 5 year olds. You can see them in the photos here as well. And all of this is packaging. So everything that you see here is packaging that comes into everything you buy. And you can see that they saw this as sea, and we were doing little fish cuts out with them. Lots of ribbon has been twined in there. So it just shows that they can make so much out of waste materials and litter and waste. And we are one of the preschools or the services that use toilet rolls in our setting. We've been very supported by our local preschool inspector. So we've never had issues with that. We've always used waste material. COVID probably was one of the challenges. So we did all the recycled materials that came in, we actually kept them separate and we left them for a week without using them as well. So there are ways to work around it. But yeah, we haven't had that issue of where the Inspectorate would have said anything about using toilet rolls in the schools. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about maths. So maths is everywhere with kids. They're always counting. Within the gardens, it's particularly interesting to look at when we're doing seed planting. We have, as I said earlier, we have buckets. We're always collecting water and using water and putting it back into the soil. But also, these trugs are really handy for toys or for water, and they allow the children to actually pick them up, move them around, and this little girl is filling her watering can before she goes off to water. So there's lots of containers of different sizes. We recycle ice cream boxes, whatever, a nice shape that the kids can play with. And you can see here as well, lots of children love the mud kitchens, but they're actually have started, as a follow-on really from COVID, have started to talk more about family life in preschool life with us. So we'd often see before they may have gone off and made a cup of tea or a cup of mud tea or a mud cake. Now they're actually setting dinner tables and they're talking about coffees and cappuccinos and lattes. So all the home environment comes really into the outdoor environment with them as well. And it's lovely to see. And then you can see that they're using different colors. They're bringing a bit of vibrancy into the mud as well, just to make their dinners a little more interesting for their friends when they come to see them. So the other thing that we love with the outdoors is the alternative viewpoints. So kids, it's so lovely just to sit back and observe and watch the kids together. You can see down here in the bottom left, there were birds in the trees and they were all figuring out what kind of birds they were. So you can see they were all looking up at the outdoor environment around them. This little boy was busy planting, but not just planting. He was sorting shapes in the containers here, and he was calling one of his friends to come over to play. These two girls are actually, I don't know if you can see it in the photo, but they have sticks in their hands and they're actually drawing out their plans for the day in the soil. So they're down in the ground, they're in the muck, they're drawing out their little plans. And we use, as much as possible, we use proper things like a proper wheelbarrow. We don't use the plastic wheelbarrows with the kids, because I just find with this, particularly these new wheelbarrows that we got, they're heavier, they have more, the kids have to be more physical in moving them. So it just gives them a better sense of their own physicality and how much effort they need to do with things as well. Just outdoor as well, as I said, they support each other, and we've seen that through the photos. Planning, they're physically changing the environment every day. It moves around every day. What was the mud kitchen today, maybe a bakery tomorrow. As we saw earlier, one of the tables was set up for dinner. That could be a music table tomorrow. So it changes all of the time, and it's very fluid as well with that. Communication is verbal and non-verbal. And we do, and I know there's a lot of talk of risk taking, but what we have noticed outside and what we've observed is it's not just physical risk taking when children are outside. We have definitely observed that children are more socially confident outside than they are inside. So they take more risks. You can have very quiet children who will sit beside somebody outside where they would be a bit more conscious inside of doing that. And so they have the space, and it's a lot more freedom for them to move around. So I would always say that, yeah, it gives you, being outdoors allows you to be more physically risky in what you're doing, but also socially as well. And that has been lovely to observe with the kids. So really, what have we observed? The less physical boundaries that kids have outside, the more space they have. We see they take more risks. We see socially and physically they will take more risks. We also see that their exploration and learning is a lot deeper, and connections and learning. So connections and learning in their own little communities are a lot deeper as well. And these are active planners. So kids are active planners and designers and constructors of their environments. This is an activity we do with the kids where they document what they like to do. This was a map of what do I see when I'm coming to school. This little girl had done everything that she loves to do in the garden. It's all about fairy gardens. And we then take that and we use that to make sure that we are capturing their interests in the environments with them outdoors. And it's a very easy thing to do with a child to say, okay, let's go out, let's have a look, let's see, is there anything that we need to change? Or, what could we do here? Or is everything just fabulous and let's just draw it? And then we sit with them. Once they're finished their drawing, we sit with them and they narrate to us what their interests are, what they like outside and what they would like to do. And so this is just some examples of that. It's very simple activity that we do with the kids, so their voices are heard and the voices can be seen in the environments with us. So just to conclude then, really what I'm passionate about is outdoor environments enable creative learning and experience, but not just for children. As educators, my preschool is beside my house. I walk over there every day. I'm just getting outside of my own door, listening to the birds, going for a walk, getting the school ready, walking around in the garden, making sure you do, with the outdoor environment, you do need to make sure that, the wheelbarrows aren't broken, that there's no broken pots or pans or whatever. So you do need to be aware of that, and you can be a lot more physical outdoors with things. So you may have stuff that breaks easier. But as an educator, you go around, you make sure that there's safety as well as enabling the child to take more risks as well. With the natural environments, it does support more risk taking. And as I've said, it's both socially and in relationship building as well as physically. And STEAM is all around as a nature. It fosters the child-led learning and child-led planning. Garvis and Prendergast have shown that playing in early years helps children to develop positive self-esteem and connection and sense of belonging, which develops a sense of identity and promotes self-regulation and also promotes independence. And we've also seen exploratory and imaginative play. When you're outdoors, you have your imagination is used more, and it's such a significant role in the emotional well-being of children. We have areas outside where the children may just go and sit down. They may just turn a bucket upside down and sit in it for a while. We've a few little bells hanging from trees. Every now and again, you might hear a little bell ringing where someone has gone to sit down and just relaxed. So we're helping the children to understand as well how they can take control of their own well-being and how they can use nature, go for a walk, listen to the birds outdoors. And for us as well, that is fantastic that we can do that every day. So that's my presentation, and thank you, Margarita, very much for inviting me to this. It's been fantastic listening to Tim as well. And I'll hand back to you then, Margarita.
Thank you very much, Denise. That was very interesting. I always love looking at the pictures that you share when you're sharing your information about your outdoor setting. It's the way the children are engaging there, and it's just really what an outdoor setting should be about, isn't it? It's just they're just mucking in everything they can find. Definitely.
Absolutely, it's amazing. It is amazing, and even things like the kids getting down on the ground, and they were planning their little day, drawing out what they were going to do for the day. It's just fantastic. It's great. Yeah.
And I love the way they all muck in and help each other. That they're there.
And it's that thing of not always verbal communication. They just do it. They just go, and you may have one child would start something, and then 2 minutes later, there's 4 or 5 kids around him. So it's great. It is fabulous.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I think we'll bring Tim back in here now for a little question and answer session, folks. And I think we have a few questions in already. The first one here, I'm going to direct you, Tim, if that's okay. What advice would you give to practitioners who are working towards building on the concept of risk in the outdoors, so that they can achieve this balanced approach? What sort of advice would you have for them?
Right. I think be positive. We've just seen a perfect illustration of a setting that's confident and positive, and has a sound and compelling understanding of the value of outdoor play and a balanced approach to risk. And it's a kind of, to use that metaphor, it is a kind of journey. But I think having that confidence and trying new things and learning from our peers is really valuable. And I know there was a comment about how do you deal with the sort of potential for parental criticism or anxiety. And just to nail that point I made about the parental spectrum. So in the nicest possible way, I think, first of all, think about those anxious and vocal parents. Okay, it's not all parents. It's a minority of parents that have real worries about this. And ultimately, you need to realize that if you let those parents have their way, effectively, you're giving that minority of parents a veto over what all your children can experience. Okay, so I think that's a helpful way to frame that. And actually, I'm not saying you're aggressive or impolite with anxious parents, but you really have to make it clear the value of these experiences and why you're offering, and of course that they're not actually that dangerous. That's the other thing. And I know somebody's asked for statistics on accidents. I haven't got any to hand, but I can tell you, and anyone in accident prevention will tell you, children are not getting hurt in outdoor play settings. They're getting hurt in streets. They're getting hurt in their own homes. They're getting hurt in classrooms. We've allowed ourselves to get bought into a myth that the outdoors is inherently dangerous. It really isn't.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tim. And I see there you sort of touched on that question that Clara had raised there about the 17-second rule, and how you could sort of talk to parents about them actually believing you.
That's right. I've said before that no parent wants their children to grow up to be terrified of every possible thing that might happen to them. All parents want their kids to be confident. And I think parents, you need to think about the communication and your website and your messaging and your maybe what parents see when they come into the setting. Maybe think about your if you have a mission statement, what does that mission statement say? I know in the UK we had a period when a lot of settings had mission statements that went something like, we offer a safe and secure setting for ... Now, those two words, safe and secure, they're really problematic. I mean, common sense people, people who are already, if you like, on side will hear that and they'll know that basically means you're being reasonable. But if you're an anxious parent and you see that phrase safe and secure, and your child comes home at the end of the day and has a bruised shin, you were saying, well, how can my child be safe? They've just got this injury. So I know settings that have gone through a process of revisiting their own mission statement, their own websites, and have realized that actually they're not communicating a balanced approach. They're communicating quite a cautious and risk-averse approach, and they've maybe gone through a process and maybe even involved some parents in discussing how they could, be clearer about A, what a balanced approach looks like, and B, how you describe it.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tim. I'm going to direct the next question to Denise, and I'm laughing to myself here. Tara,
thanks, Tara. Just to follow up as well on Tim's point there, one of the things that we know works with our group of parents, and our parents are very supportive. We do treat them more like a community of parents. We're all working to the best that we can do for their kids. But one of the things that does really work for us is sharing WhatsApp images of the kids. So we set up a little group. It's only for those parents and the two educators. The parents agree that they won't send or forward photos of anybody else around. And it shows, you do get comments back. I didn't know they could do that. It was great seeing whoever walking on the log walk on their own. They won't do that at home. And it's look, I'm a parent as well. I know I'm less strict with my third child than I was with my first child. So experience, we all have experience, and using our experience as well. But I think the more, for us, seeing our parents as supportive, and they are like our community of practice with us, they will have ideas. We have 2 slides that are embedded in our grasp, but someone said that to me a couple of years ago. We had we replaced a slide, and they had mentioned that they had seen it somewhere. So we have those in our grasp because a parent mentioned it to us. So, you can work in it together. And I think a photo, a picture paints 1,000 words. So the more you can share an insight into what you're doing on a daily basis with the kids, that gives parents more confidence as well to try those kind of things with them.
Yeah, indeed. And Denise, you mentioned COVID there in your presentation, and I'm just wondering what recommendations would you have for settings that maybe just moved outdoors during that sort of COVID period or as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I would say start small and then trust in yourself, because you will have the experience of working with those kids anyway. You can do lots of gardening things in very small space. A lot of places don't have a lot of space. We're very lucky and fortunate where we are. And I would start small. So a log walk doesn't have to be that high off the ground. It's more about balance. You can have little stumps of trees, or if some of the parents might have this type of material at home that they can bring in and help. Tires, old tires, the kids can bounce in and out of, or use them as raised beds. So I would say start small, build your own confidence in it, and ask parents to be part of it and parents to support, and they will have ideas as well. So yeah, I think that would work.
Yeah, and that ties in there with a question I just see there. Sinead Gunning has asked a question there about, is it worth doing activities with parents regarding their childhood play and experiences? And
yeah.
Sort of them about that. Yeah, you would encourage that.
And another thing we do with the parents, which has worked as well, is we've involved them in we have a welly recycling program. So people leave their wellies with us, but it means the next kids that come along have wellies. And then any of those wellies that are too old or broken or cut, we plant in them or we send them home. So, there's things that you can do with the families to involve them more as well. But yeah, I sent out the invitation to this webinar to all my parents, so everybody I knew, because it's just fantastic to be everybody's on the same level. I think COVID made us all think about our own personal space, what's important to us. And then how can we take advantage of being outdoors? So I think it's very opportune at the moment that more services get outdoors, and then I suppose don't try and do it all on your own. You know, there are parents who will support you. Not every parent will have the time to do that, but some parents will, and, you know, do it together. That's what I think we've changed our view. You know, we work together as a community with parents as much as we can, and involve parents as much as we can, and sharing things. You know, parents share photos back with us, things that are going on at home as well with them as well, or if they've gone somewhere, you know, on a holiday and something might have reminded them of us. So it's, you know, it's building up that shared experience, I think, is what we need to really focus on with parents, and the children know it, you know, so we need to listen a bit more to them too, I think. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Denise. Tim, can I just ask you, you're interested in sort of the different types of, and you showed us a couple of pictures there of different types of playgrounds and things like that. And I know that your urban playground book sort of touches on sort of cities and the way they're laid out and designed and so on. I'm just wondering, what advice would you give to practitioners that maybe who talk about maybe our inner city practices that have very small areas? How would they engage with those and make the most of them so that they can touch on the natural environment?
It's a really good question, and in fact, because I was in Dublin last month or the month before, lucky enough to get over during that hot period for a holiday in Ireland, and I remember seeing a childcare setting in Dublin that had a pretty frankly dismal outdoor space, but even there, I think using natural elements can really transform the feeling of even a really small space. And I've seen settings in London. I'm speaking to you from East London, which has, you know, a fair few settings that are not, you know, there's not a lot of outdoor space, but I mean, you can still find places to bring in loose materials, sand, dirt, plants in planters, and soften the boundaries as well. Think about how you can use, you know, real plants, not plastic stuff that you use that you know just looks really horrible, but actual living plants. I know it's an extra, you know, task, but I bet you many places will either have within their staff team or within their parents and volunteers people who would be really keen to give some time. And once you get something like that set up, actually keeping it ticking over can be relatively straightforward. And you may also find that, you know, there might be someone in your network or you know, within the municipality who's got a background in landscape gardening or landscape architecture, again, who can just give a bit of you know, pro bono input into what you can do in your particular space.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Denise, you also looked at the whole idea of STEAM in the natural environment, and it's something that we're quite interested in Portobello at the moment. We're doing quite a bit of research into it. And I think, do you think that practitioners really fully understand sort of that underlying elements of STEAM that are sort of found in the natural environment? Actually, direct that question.
I think probably we do it without realizing a lot of the time that we are doing it. And I think our conversations, myself and yourself, Margarita, have led me to go back and look at things a different way. So I'm not changing anything I'm doing, but I'm saying, you know, actually that is science, or that is technology, or that is the arts, you know. And so I think having the background knowledge actually helps you in practice, because a lot of us are practicing for 10 or 11 or 12 years. So even going back and thinking, okay, how can we link all of this? Or what is the link? The link is probably there already. You know, we're talking about going outside, but science is inside and outside. So, you know, it's there. It's just, I suppose, really what helps with institutes like Portobello, putting the focus on it, is it makes you stop and think, well, actually, yeah, how is this working? And then to observe kids a bit more, I think, and then being outside, you can do that a lot more. That's what I found as well. You can sit back and observe a lot more, and anything to do with nature, if you just change your thinking, well, it's all science, then, you know, you are doing STEAM with the kids every day. And it's a lot easier than you think. You don't have to go out and buy loads of things, or, you know, get, I know there are probably, because the focus is starting to come in STEAM, there will probably be shops now that will have little sets or whatever. You don't need any of that stuff. You know, get a jar, fill it with water, add a drop of food coloring. Recycling, that's part of STEAM. You know, there's so much out there already. Building a stick man with sticks and leaves, you know, we're there. You've manufactured something. So, you know, it's all there. It's just the labeling isn't as fluent. And I think that's probably it, you know, getting more recognition for what is actually happening, and then understanding it a bit more, that and how it links in. But I think we have the inert knowledge. It's just we don't label it or probably categorize it as much. And then once you do start categorizing it, it's actually very easy to link it back to, well, why is it so important in a child's development? So it's, you know, putting all those links together. And I've really, for me, I suppose, in our conversations, that's where it's come back to me. Yeah, we are actually doing it. And it gives you an ideas then to figure out a little bit, you know, something new to bring in as well. Yeah, so I think we probably need to highlight it more, that it is actually happening there. And I do think at this moment in time, there's a lot more focus internally in Ireland on early education, which up until now really hasn't been. You know, we haven't been seen as experts within early education, even though we have the experience and we are working with the children. And there's a huge percentage of early years educators who actually self-fund themselves to, you know, level 8s, level 9s, level 10s. So there's a huge desire there to actually give back as much as you can to the kids and have, you know, be the most knowledgeable that you can in the sector. So I think I'm probably waffling now a little bit, but anyway.
You're okay. You're okay. Yeah, and I think that ties back very, very well to risk and risk management and encouraging children to manage risk, because we then have the critical thinking, the problem solving, and all of that going on. You know, Tim, would you like to add anything there?
Excuse me. Not particularly, but I did just want to pick up. I know there were some questions in the comments, and I can't type into the comments myself, I'm afraid, or if I can, I don't know how to. But it was about insurance. So can I leap in and say something about insurance, Margarita? Is that okay?
You can indeed, yes.
Excuse me, because somebody earlier on asked about that topic, because it was raised. I think there was one setting where the insurers told the setting that they couldn't use tools, and they weren't
use tools.
Real tools, they were sort of play tools. Now, okay, so a couple of things about insurance. One, I hope, is really obvious. Insurance is a market. There's a marketplace for insurance. So you might find that if insurer A throws up these roadblocks, you can find insurer B who will take a more balanced approach. Now, that's not always the case, but that's certainly, you know, in the UK, there is a market for insurers. And especially if you're part of a group of settings, you actually have quite a lot of power in that market, because you collectively, your business is important for insurers. Now, second thing, and this is a real thing that happened here in the UK. I think it was about 15 years ago. I think I wrote about it on my blog, but there was a period where forest school settings, so settings that ran forest school programs, started getting told by insurers that they could only use ropes. So, you know, ropes, shaped up ropes for trees, if they paid a huge premium. Okay, so this came out of nowhere, massive hike in the premium if you wanted to use ropes, and it was a real problem. But the Forest School Association and other collective groups of forest schools went to the insurers and just basically got around the table and said, look, what's this about? Where's this come from? And it turns out that one underwriter in the insurance industry had come up with a sort of doom scenario, not a real life case, but a sort of doom scenario, what if, where they convinced themselves that there was a real risk, you know, and a catastrophic injury that could result from a rope. Now, I'll make clear here, there was no actual accident. It was just somebody, you know, exercising catastrophic thinking. Mm-hmm. And when that came out and they had this discussion with the forest school group, and they also pointed to some good practice guidance from the Forestry Commission, okay, the government's Forestry Commission, about rope swings that had some sensible advice. Basically, the insurers agreed that this was not a good approach. They took away the huge increase in premium, and they said that any setting that signed up to, a sort of reasonable practice could more or less carry on as they did before. So the moral of the story is, don't just take as read, don't just accept if an insurer comes along and says, oh, you can't do this, or we'll only let you do that if you have a massive increase in your premium. Insurers, and there's a kind of cultural thing. Insurers, I've run sessions with insurance companies, and I've asked them to remember where they used to play when they were kids. And guess what? They also used to climb trees and go in the streams. They don't want to be the fun police here. So, again, if we have more confidence and a robust approach in our conversations, we can make a great deal of progress.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tim. I think we've covered mostly everything. If there are any questions that we've missed that are in that chat bar there, we can maybe get you to answer them for us and upload it for people afterwards. Is that okay, Tim?
Sure, and I'm happy for people to have access to the slide deck that I shared as well, because there are some nice links there, including some wonderful videos. Because again, just as Denise was saying, a picture or a video clip can be incredibly powerful in paint, bringing to life what we're talking about here.
Can indeed. Just as a final, and I don't know, I know you mentioned your Urban Playground book there earlier on. Do you want to give us a little insight as to what that's about?
Sure. In essence, it's called how child-friendly planning and design can save cities. So it's sort of asking what would make cities work better for kids, and actually it's about not just creating lots of reservations where we can stick them in and they can't go anywhere else. It's about opening up the whole neighborhood as a place where children can get around, where they can play, they can have contact with nature, they can see their friends, they can gradually expand their wings. So the book is really, it says this vision of a child-friendly city is a really can be a powerful way to move neighborhoods and cities in the direction that we actually know they need to go to keep us all healthier and happier. And also, and I don't want to get heavy here, but as a response to the climate crisis, every city on earth is going to have to change if we're going to produce less carbon, live more locally. But one of the messages from my book is that's not necessarily a bad thing. For our kids, it can be a wonderful thing, because it will allow them maybe some of those freedoms that we enjoyed and our parents and grandparents enjoyed, and we can give them back to children as part of a more sustainable city.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much, Denise. It was lovely listening to you both this evening. Very informative indeed. And folks, that's the end of our webinar for this evening. I thank you all for tuning in and listening to us. And hopefully you'll tune into our next one when it comes up. Good night, everybody.
Good night.